Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump announces that the suspect in the killing of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk has been taken into custody after massive manhunt. China sails its most advanced aircraft carrier, the Fujian, through the Taiwan Strait and into the South China Sea, as the US and Japan hold drills in the region. Russia accuses Ukraine of launching an attack drone at a nuclear power plant, saying it shot down more than 200 Ukrainian drones in one of Kiev's largest overnight attacks. Nepal's former Chief Justice Sushila Karki has been chosen to lead the country's interim administration, ending days of speculation over who would serve as the caretaker Prime Minister following the collapse of the KP Sharma Ali government after the youth-led protests. And Britain will not rejoin the European Union in the foreseeable future, says the minister leading Prime Minister Keir Starmer's recent reset of European relations. Hello and welcome. Let's start with Kenya. 2 months ago, deadly anti-government protests rocked the country. It was led by Gen Z protesters. Now the Ruto government has slapped terror charges against more than 70 such young protesters. They were arrested during the nationwide anti-government protests on the 25th of June and the 7th of July. Now, the prosecution has requested an additional 21 days to finalise investigations against all of the accused. The prosecution has alleged that some of the suspects had links to terror networks. The Ruto government has said that terror charges on the protesters are justified. But the defence lawyers and human rights groups have slammed the government for using anti-terror laws as a weapon to silence dissent.
We have rights enshrined in the Constitution. We have the right to protest. We have the right to picket. We have the Bill of Rights. How then does a situation of an individual or a group of people demanding for a better country, demanding for peace, demanding for justice, demanding for dignity, how does that morph into a case of terrorism?
Our Constitution is very clear. Protesting is within our rights to do that. But when you criminalize democracy, what you have in front of you is people who have refused to let go and continue to defend our Constitution.
One of the top critics of this crackdown is a former top judge. Now, his name is David Maraga. He has condemned the Ruto government for terrorising the youth.
What we are protesting against are those charges of terrorism. They will not hold, and the DPP knows they will not hold. All that is being done is to detain the accused persons. And I have said this before, as far as we are concerned, it is the state which is terrorizing the young people.
Maraga has also joined the race to dethrone Ruto in the 2027 presidential elections. While announcing his presidential bid in June, Maraga said that he was shocked into action by Ruto's violent crackdown on protesters. Another Ruto critic turned rival is Boniface Mwangi. He is a human rights activist who announced his presidential bid last month. Mwangi, too, faced terror charges over the anti-government protests, but those were ultimately dropped. Since coming to power in 2022, President Ruto's popularity has dropped drastically. The Kenyan youth is growing frustrated with Ruto over the economic crisis, corruption, violent crackdown on dissent, and police brutality. As per a report by the International Justice Mission, more than 40% of Kenyans have experienced police abuses, and 69% reported witnessing misconduct. The Kenyan police have also been accused of using excessive force against protesters during the deadly anti-tax protests in June last year. Since then, a wave of deadly protests has hit the East African nation. Despite the growing public outrage and international criticism, Ruto has stood firm so far. He is even seeking a new term in the upcoming elections. But the public anger is growing, and any further attempts to silence the Kenyan youth is likely to backfire on the Ruto government. Now, for more on this, we have with us Stella Agara, a governance and security analyst who is joining us live from Nairobi in Kenya. As always, great to have you on the show. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you for having me.
Now, from a legal and a constitutional standpoint, does the Ruto administration have a strong basis for framing peaceful or even disruptive protesters under terrorism laws? And what precedent could this set for freedom of assembly in Kenya?
I think let me first register in this conversation, Alison, that it takes a very high threshold to prove treason in the courts in Kenya. Treason is covered and defined under Section 40 of the Penal Code, Cap 63 of the laws of Kenya, and basically it covers the intention of committing an overt act to either kill the president or overthrow the government or declare war or levy war upon the nation. For a court or for the prosecution to be able to prove that these young people have actually engaged in treason, they would have to, provide evidence that this group of people had the intention to actually commit either a murder of the president or an execution of the president or to overthrow the government as the law defines. In that case, they would have to provide written evidence of intentions or a plan or a devising of some sort, of some plans to be able to do the same. Right. The other thing is they need to demonstrate that there are overt acts to actually commit this crime. I doubt that they're going to be able to reach this threshold, and I'm not surprised that the prosecution is asking for 21 more days, because the evidence that they would have collected around this case is evidence around people planning to protest, which is legally covered in the laws, and I like that I've seen it in the news item that you have done. Picketing, assembly, demonstration, having conversations to plan for picketing and assembly is something that is legal and acceptable in Kenya, and so it will be very difficult for them to prove that threshold. I know, and I'm certain, and I can say it without fear or prejudice, that this is an act by the state to try and limit the young people, to exhaust court cases, to make it extremely expensive for young people to participate in protests. But the agency around which these young people are organizing will not stop them. They will have to arrest practically all the youth in this country if they do not focus on addressing the issues that the youth want the government to address.
Yes, Stella, the former Chief Justice David Maraga argues that it is in fact the state who are terrorizing young people. Now, how does this critique reflect broader concerns about shrinking democratic space in Kenya, and could this strategy risk fueling further unrest rather than curbing dissent?
I think one of the first of all, let me agree with the former Chief Justice that indeed what we are seeing with these charges, with these trumped up charges on treason, and even the clampdown on the voices of citizens is actually evidence of shrinking political space in Kenya. It's something that has been happening gradually under this government and is now becoming a worrying trend. Some of the yardsticks that we'll be looking at is, first of all, the disregard for the rule of law and constitutionalism, refusal by the government to follow court orders, even when it has been demonstrated that there are certain actions they need to take legally that they refuse to take, even the refusal to prosecute state agents who they are using to attack the citizens. When you look at the decreased representation of the people, where even the representatives of the people do not cover the interests of those who that they are representing, that you will not find a conversation in Parliament about the question of these treason cases is problematic. The muzzling of the voices of youth, arresting them, abducting them, accusing them of treason is definitely a sign of shrinking political space. Victimization of anyone who speaks against the government, and this is just people speaking against the government. I haven't seen anyone arrested or accused of treason because they spoke against the opposition, and yet Kenyans speak equally against the opposition and against the government. The imminent dictatorship that we're seeing rising in Kenya is definitely a factor where the state and the president is constantly right, is definitely a sign of a shrinking political space. The crackdown on the opposition leaders, attempts to even arrest them and stop them from having meetings. And finally, for me, Alison, is a suppressing of the voices of youth and women. We have seen most of the youth voices being suppressed, and now very recently we've also started seeing suppression of the voices of women, especially representatives in the National Assembly. That then gets to tell us that we have a problem, and a huge problem coming up, and if nothing is done, we may actually not be able to defend the tenets of democracy in our nation.
Right. And Stella, taking it one step further, given Kenya's role as a key regional ally in counter-terrorism, how might the decision to equate Gen Z protesters with terrorists affect its international reputation and its credibility in the fight against genuine extremists' threats in East Africa?
My first conclusion is that we are going to be taken for a joke. Kenya has had an exemplary record in the collaborations for the fight against violent extremism and countering violent extremism in the region. We play a core role. We host a very important agency that actually contributes tremendously to management of violent extremism in the region and supporting global efforts to deal with violent extremism. For a region that has seen a lot of terrorist attacks and terrorist groups, we definitely need to continue to demonstrate that we're serious about this act. When we start labeling young people as terrorists, we are now showing that this is no longer a law that is there to govern how we handle violent extremism, but it's a tool for oppression. We risk being taken as a joke. We risk being considered probably not up to the task of actually dealing with violent extremism. But most importantly, we risk legitimizing the terrorists who actually continue to terrorize our nations in the East Africa region, especially at a time such as this, which is the period when we are commemorating the 9/11, and it's a time when we need to be demonstrating to the world that we understand the task we took up the day we decided to fight violent extremism, even as we continue with running our nation.
Yeah. Stella, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you for having me.
From the unrest in Kenya, let's turn our attention to the political chaos in South Sudan. President Salva Kiir has suspended the country's first vice president, Riek Machar. Kiir stripped Machar of his post hours after he was charged with murder, treason and crimes against humanity over an attack by an ethnic militia on a military base. The attack took place back in March. A militia from Machar's ethnic Nuer community, known as the White Army, attacked a military base in Nasser. More than 250 soldiers were killed in the attack. Among the dead were several senior officers and a general. UN pilots were also killed while they were trying to rescue the soldiers at the base. Since the attack in March, Machar has been under house arrest. Now the government has held him responsible for the attack and has charged Machar and 20 others with murder, conspiracy, terrorism, treason, destruction of public property, and crimes against humanity.
Evidence further suggests, actually reveals, that the White Army operated under the command and influence of certain leaders of the Sudan's People Liberation Movement Army in Opposition, SPLM-AIO, including Dr. Machar through a coordinated military and political structures.
President Kiir has also suspended the petroleum minister, who was charged along with Machar. Now, Machar's party has rejected the charges against him and has accused the government of trying to enforce authoritarian control and one-tribe rule in the country. International powers have warned that Machar's suspension and the charges slapped against him could tip the country back into civil war. To understand this, let's take a look at the history. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011. But soon a civil war broke out between Machar's ethnic Nuer forces and the Dinka fighters loyal to his longtime rival, Salva Kiir. The devastating war lasted for 5 years. Nearly 40,000 people were killed. The war ended in 2018 after Kiir and Machar signed a power-sharing agreement, but their partnership has remained tense ever since, and violence has continued between the two rival camps. Attempts by the international community to ensure a democratic transition in the country has failed so far. The election that was supposed to take place in December of last year has once again been postponed to 2026. So the tensions remain as high as ever. President Kiir has suspended his top rival, and many of Machar's allies have also been detained. Now it remains to be seen if this move helps President Kiir to consolidate power or to push the country back into a devastating civil war. And our next story is from Tanzania. A major court verdict might have just heated up the October presidential race. A Tanzanian High Court has reversed a ban on a leading presidential candidate and challenger to President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Luhaga Mpina has been reinstated as the candidate of Tanzania's third largest party, the Alliance for Change and Transparency, or ACT. Now, he was barred from standing by the Electoral Commission last month on the grounds that he lacked qualifications. But the judge said that the decision was unconstitutional, void and of no effect, and that Mpina was denied the right to be heard. Now, following the decision, the Election Commission must now include his name on the ballot paper for the October 29th elections. Now, this may give the presidential race some competition, where many of the main candidates have been either barred or jailed. Other parties are also facing a crackdown. Tundu Lissu, the leader of the main opposition party, Chadema, is currently on trial for treason charges that carry the death penalty. He claims the charges were fabricated to prevent him from challenging President Hassan in the upcoming election. Meanwhile, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has launched her campaign for the polls, and this will be her first direct election. She came to power in 2021 after the death of her predecessor, John Magufuli. Now, Magufuli was known for an authoritarian style of governance, marked by a crackdown on the media, civil society, and opposition parties. When Hassan replaced him, she signaled reforms, restoring some opposition and media freedoms and dismissing some of Magufuli's loyalists. But now she faces accusations of following the same playbook, not just barring and jailing opponents, but Tanzania has also seen a worrying rise in opposition killings, abductions and disappearances, often targeting leaders from the main opposition party. Now, her party, CCM, is the nation's long-ruling party and Africa's second longest-serving political organization. The CCM has dominated Tanzanian politics since 1977 and has won every general election since the country shifted to a multi-party democracy. Public opinion in Tanzania toward the CCM and President Samia Suluhu Hassan is sharply divided. The CCM remains popular among rural, older and patronage-dependent groups, but there is a growing frustration, especially in urban and online spaces, over political exclusion, state capture of elections and declining prospects for change. Civil society, religious leaders and even some of the CCM party elders warn of a creeping dictatorship and the decline of Tanzanian democracy. There have been international concerns as well. Western nations have warned against election-related violence or actions undermining democracy. However, President Hassan has pushed back, accusing them of interfering in Tanzania's domestic affairs. Now, amid the rising criticism, the upcoming elections will reveal the true strength of Tanzania's political landscape and whether this vote marks a turning point or a continuation of a long-running dominance by the ruling CCM party. And our last story is from Zambia. For months, communities in northern Zambia have been suffering from the aftermath of a toxic spill at a Chinese-owned copper mine. The government is now demanding greater compensation for the damage. In February, a dam holding waste from the Sino-Metals Leach copper mine in Zambia collapsed, and it released highly acidic mine water laden with toxic heavy metals into the Kafu River, which is a major source of drinking water. The company apologized and offered $580,000 in compensation. But the Vice President, Mutale Nalumango, has now insisted that this is insufficient, stressing that the safety of Zambians is non-negotiable. The mining firm initially claimed only 50,000 tons of waste had leaked. However, a South African environmental group estimates that nearly 900,000 cubic meters of toxic tailings remain in the environment. It found dangerous levels of cyanide, arsenic, lead, copper, zinc, chromium, cadmium, and other pollutants that are posing serious long-term risks, including organ damage, birth defects, and cancer. Now, Sino-Metals has disputed these findings, and the community's villagers reported skin rashes, eye irritations, diarrhea, nausea, and breathing difficulties after coming into contact with this contaminated water. The spill has prompted travel warnings, and Finland last month reported water samples with 24 different heavy metals as it issued a travel advisory. The U.S. Embassy also issued a health alert and pulled its personnel out of Kitwe and nearby areas, citing widespread contamination. Zambia's government, however, downplayed the threat, saying that there was no longer a serious risk to public health.
Serious implications on public health, water safety, agriculture, and the environment have been brought under control. There is, therefore, no cause for alarm.
Zambia Zambia is one of the world's top 10 copper producers and depends heavily on mining. China has become a major player in Zambia as well as Africa's mining sector with large-scale investments. However, Chinese operators have faced criticism, not just for environmental damage, but also for labor abuses, lack of transparency, and favoring Chinese workers over local communities. The Zambian government says it is determined to hold those responsible accountable, ensuring that profits do not come at the cost of people's health and the environment. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and goodbye.